Okay, so welcome everybody. I am very honored to introduce our speaker today, Nicholas Johnson from Virginia Commonwealth University. He's the Associate Professor and George Bliley Research Chair in Neurology and Vice Chair for Research and Director of the Center for Inherited Muscle Research. I don't know how you have enough hours in the day to do all of that. So Dr. Johnson hails originally from, I think, Arizona. He got his undergraduate and medical degree at the University of Arizona and completed his neurology residency and fellowship in neuromuscular medicine and experimental therapeutics at the University of Rochester. In addition to the work that he'll be describing in FSHD, he does research in a variety of muscular dystrophies, including myotonic dystrophy, limb-girdle, and he conducts therapeutic trials in multiple disorders. So he brings a wealth of expertise across diseases, but he's also one of our shining lights in the firmament of FSHD research. So with that, Dr. Johnson, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks for the very kind introduction. And you can see my screen, correct? It's in the
Yes.
slideshow. Yeah, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me here. I have the auspicious task of trying to cover all of the drug development progress that's happened in 2023. And this I think I was putting the slides together and thinking this is what an amazing holiday present because there's so much work happening in this space. It's really impressive. It's exciting to see. I'm excited to see what's going to happen in 2024. But my task today is to cover, the work that's happening in trying to bring effective therapies forward for FSHD. A word at the outset. I did solicit slides from many of our colleagues in industry and tried to present those. They're essentially, you can see, these are coming to you essentially unedited from the companies working the space. And so if any of them are listening, I did have to cut a few slides here and there to try and meet my time parameters because there's, like I said, there's so much happening. So let's get started. Okay, these are my disclosures. So I think everybody on this call should know, but you just to remind you that for FSHD, by and large affects the face, the scapular muscles, humeral muscles. It eventually causes other muscle weakness. The predominant impairment is in the muscle weakness, although it can cause significant pain, occasionally cause respiratory problems or vision or hearing problems, but really most of the focus should be on in treating the muscular impairment. So, how could you treat FSHD? Well, it's got really complicated genetics, and so that's a good thing and a bad thing. I think it took a while to kind of figure out and help develop treatments that would be effective for the condition, but because it's a multi-step process, there's so many different places to try and intervene. You'll see this slide come back as we kind of move through the different steps. But basically, so in FSHD, you have this D4Z4 repetitive expansion at the end of one of your chromosomes. And in FSHD type 1, that gets cut short. When that happens, it hypomethylates and a gene that's toxic for your muscles called DUX4 gets expressed, and that causes that muscle necrosis and degeneration. And so in FSHD2, you have this mutation in this other gene, which also unwinds the gene, and you similarly end up with DUX4 overexpression. So the way I think about it is like having a ball of yarn, and you cut the end of it, it frays, and when that happens, it kind of gets loose, and this DUX4 gene is bad. So there are many places to try to target the disease mechanism. Today, we're going to focus on four. Not talking about today, there are efforts in terms of CRISPR to restore the D4Z4 repeats. Because that's not an active trial program, we're not going to talk any more about it today. But things you can think about doing. Number two, what's called epigenetic silencing of the D4Z4 repetitive element. You can try to modulate that epigenetic methylation. You can try and knock down or silence the DUX4 expression, or you can try and treat the muscle degeneration and atrophy that develops. So there are challenges, and these slides are here provided by my colleague, Dr. Statland, who chairs or is the PI of the FSHD CTRN. It is caused by a toxic overexpression, and because that it's there's not a structural muscle protein, so it can be a little bit tricky in terms of a biomarker. It can affect a wide variety of people from birth to old age. There can be considerable variability in terms of severity and progression between individuals and even within single families. You can have asymmetry and weakness from side to side, and on average, it's very slowly progressive. So all of these things are really challenges for FSHD in terms of getting trial ready, being ready to develop treatments, because that right now there's no current FDA-approved therapies. Thankfully, Dr. Statland will have organized the FSHD CTRN. And the goal of this network is to hasten therapeutic development for FSHD by training sites and streamlining regulatory and data management and engaging all of you to help us build this trial readiness, to refine trial strategies and develop clinical outcome measures, to understand the disease impact, and then provide these resources to our colleagues in industry. And it really is, it takes a whole village to raise a child. You can see all the funders and support that the FSHD CTRN puts into this. And these are the current members of the FSHD CTRN. So hopefully you can find one of these really excellent sites close by you, because these are the people who are both clinically knowledgeable about FSHD, but also ready and willing to kind of likely to be the initial trial sites in some form or fashion. So there are a number of ongoing FSHD CTRN study. So one is Resolve FSHD, which is completely enrolled. I would point out this MOVE study, which has minimal assessments. It includes adults and children with 272 participants so far, and has a sub-study focusing on trying to develop better biomarkers. Both of those studies are open to enrollment at one of those sites that I was on the map before that. So please really consider participating in one of those studies. You can do that by contacting Michaela Walker. Her email's right there. She will try and get you the closest open site. And that's really important because the trials that we're going to describe over the next 40 minutes or so are possible because of the prior efforts of the FSHD CTRN, and they couldn't prepare those resources and development without you participating in one of those studies. So first of all, thank you if you've done that. And if you haven't, please consider participating in one of these trial readiness studies because it's so important to help to continue build that foundation upon which we launch successful treatments. Okay, so what is the drug approval process? So on average, it takes 12 years for a drug to be approved, and the odds are pretty daunting in that only out of the 5,000 drugs that are tested, only 5 actually make it to clinical trial, and then only one of those 5 drugs make it to market. So really pretty steep odds, but I think that a lot of this is based off of work that has happened and less precise genetic methodology. And so I think in some ways FSHD is ready and set to go to avoid some of these challenges because so much work has gone into preparing both the biological mechanism and how to design trials. So who participates in this study? You'll hear these terms throughout the rest of the talk. So phase 1 studies are focusing on safety. These are often either healthy volunteers or mildly affected individuals. Phase 2 individuals, these are focused on, phase 2 trials, are focused on safety and dosing. So these are likely mild to moderately affected individuals. And then phase 3 trials is focused on, hey, does this drug work? So focus on efficacy. So it could be the same population as phase 2. It's often a larger study. It often includes more patients or a broader range of patients. So really, if you look at kind of the figure below, you'll see phase 1 and phase 2 trials are really small. They are as such because the goal is to test safety in as few as possible, few people as possible as you need, because you don't want to expose people to undue risk. I recognize that that's also really frustrating because sometimes you're like, hey, I really are interested in participating in this study. How do I get in? And so I think that, just to know these steps, and phase 3, like I said, often is a bigger trial. So, um, drug approval process is probably different for rare diseases like FSHD. There in the United States, there's regulatory relief through the Orphan Drug Act that both allows for several different regulatory steps that really help companies in this space move through these different phases faster in a more efficient way. And so the bottom line is there probably is faster for FSHD than standard drug development, which is good for all of us. Because I think some of these treatments we'll talk about are, we want to make sure that, that we get them to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Sometimes I get this question, so I thought I'd answer it at the beginning. Can you get the drug outside of the clinical trial program? For phase 1, 2 programs, probably not. These early clinical trials need to focus on safety. That's the first question that has to be answered. And so it's not safe to provide that drug oftentimes outside of that clinical trial. Oftentimes, however, there are often open access studies that work in parallel to later studies, like late phase 3 studies. And so that's the time to probably start to watch or think about, is this going to be made more accessible outside of the clinical trial itself? Okay, with that, let's start to talk about some of these programs. And we're going to start by talking about, it's a whole mouthful, epigenetic silencing of the locus. So a company called Epic Bio has been working on a molecule in FSHD using a system they call GEMS. And this is a little complicated, so I'm going to try to walk through it a little slowly. Essentially, what is happening is that they're using gene therapy to deliver something that can silence the genome itself. And so there's really 3 different steps, 3 different parts of the drug, uh, in addition to the virus itself. The first is the guide RNA. So this is basically like the homing beacon or the target that helps target the whole system to where it's supposed to go. And so in this particular case, it would target the DUX4 or the locus and not want to go. You don't want it to go other places. And then there's this dead Cas protein, which is like a CRISPR protein that does not cut the DNA, but it binds the guide RNA at the target site. And then lastly, it has these kind of, in the picture, you can see these modulator proteins that are engineered basically they can either activate or repress the target, but here they would be repressing it. So in FSHD, as we said, it's a loss of that methylation, the unwinding of the yarn, and that induces that toxic DUX4 expression. And so what they're proposing to do is to essentially bring this CRISPR-based platform to silence that locus and restore methylation. So they would not alter the underlying DNA sequence, but really kind of try and wind that yarn back up. That's the goal of how this would work. So really at the root cause. It is packaged in a virus vector called AAVrh74. If some of you may be familiar with this, as it's the same same viral vector that's being used in the Sarepta's Levitus gene therapy program. So it has been used in other programs because it's done because the drug is being delivered through a viral vector. It's a single time infusion. So this is just a picture here showing you the different components like we talked about. So you have this viral vector with this AAV RH74, which is how you deliver the drug that you're interested in. And we do that because these viral vectors are effective at getting into the cells. You have the DNA sequence, which is that cargo there that we talked about, which is really that. So it's the D4Z4 RNA, so that's going to kind of guide it into where it's supposed to go to. And then it has this DCAS onyx with a modulator, which is designed to really restore the winding of the DNA at that particular locus. Um, it looks promising to me because it has no DNA cuts. It would be delivered through a one-time infusion, so that's often appealing, and it would target the mechanism right at where it starts. So you can see they have a few pieces of data where they have tested this. So in myoblasts from patients, so these are muscle cells that have come from individuals with FSHD. You can see, for example, that normally these cells die because the DUX4 is toxic to muscles, but you can see that at both the low and the high dose, they could have better cell survival. And then similarly, when you look at it in a humanized mouse model of FSHD, you can see, for example, that normally you have DUX4 that's expressed here, and that at both the low and the high dose, they reduce the expression. As I said, the DUX4 causes cell death, which is what you're looking at here. And so you can see that normally you have a fair amount of cell death, and that's reduced with the drug that they've tested. So they've gone through the steps to show that this is potentially could be a potentially promising way of treating individuals with FSHD. And so they intend to launch this first inpatient human study, which is a phase 1/2 clinical trial. I'll draw your attention to a few different things here. First, to see that they're expecting to enroll 6 to 9 participants. That's a very small number of individual. And so, this is going to, again, because the focus is really on safety. And so this is just a schematic of how they're planning on following these individuals for at least a year, looking at the muscle biopsy for DUX4 expression, other things, and then watching, using these functional and clinical outcome measures every 3 months, and then likely beyond that, to see whether or not this drug might have some of the effects that they're looking at. So this is just a schematic here looking at this particular EPI 321 from Epic Bio, which is focusing on silencing the epigenetic locus there. So right at the root cause, looks like a promising early phase clinical trial, and that should be launching here in short order. Let's move on to same basic idea. So trying to silence that locus or modulate the methylation from an epigenetic level. And this is Fulcrum Therapeutics has a drug called losmapimod. This is the most advanced development. This drug is in phase 3 clinical trials, so it's furthest along in that path that we showed early on. It is a MAP kinase inhibitor that's basically designed to kind of help support the rewinding of that yarn as well. So working at the same basic idea. And it's an oral therapy. It's been tested in a number of different conditions, so over 3,600 participants to date. And I'm going to go through some of the data that they have about this particular drug. So this is looking at their Redux phase 2 clinical trial. So this is the phase 2 trial that's been completed. They enrolled 80 participants from 18 to 65 years old. A big shout out to both the company, the individuals who participated, and the trial sites. This trial was conducted in the middle of the pandemic, which was taxing, I think, for all of us. And so they basically followed people for 48 weeks, which you can see here. They looked at the change in baseline in DUX4 activity. I'm not going to show those data because of the sake of time, but they really didn't meet that target, probably because of some of the variability in the biomarker itself. And then they did look at reachable workspace, MRI endpoints, and then a number of other outcome measures. I'm just going to talk about two things again because we've got a lot of stuff to get through. So this is the primary endpoint where they looked at the change in DUX4 gene expression in muscle biopsies, and it was found to really be highly variable, and not a particularly useful measure for them. So this may be a little hard to see, so I apologize, but you can come close to your computer. So the orange dots here are the individuals who received losmapimod, and the blue dots are placebo. And you can see that they really had no change across the whole group, but it's equally impressive to see the whole range of downstream DUX4 gene expression changes, very variable, both at baseline and then you can see at 16 and 36 weeks. So, I think that's one of the reasons why the Move Plus study was initiated is an effort to really kind of hone down, try and get this to work better in the future. They also looked at muscle fat fraction in FSHD. And this, if you look down here, you can kind of see this is normal, healthy muscle. It looks like if you go to the grocery store and you're looking for non-marbled beef, this is kind of what that looks like. So it's mostly black. That's muscle. You can see as the disease progresses, this kind of white stuff comes in. That's the fat and scar tissue that comes in and replaces it. And then eventually, like for example, here, this muscle is completely replaced by fat. So that muscle is hard to recover. But so a lot of the effort's been made to focus on, for example, this intermediate muscle. So you've got some fat or scar tissue replacement, but there's still a lot of muscle to recover and potentially restore. So this is this B muscle. And in this particular study, what they were able to show is that when they looked at additional fat infiltration in B muscles, so these are people, partially affected but not fully, or normal muscles, compared to placebo, they saw some shifts. And it's important to remember, if you look at these numbers, these scales, these are still small changes, but they are changes in the right direction. So here you can see against placebo, the losmapimod did not have as much of a change from baseline. And similarly, when you look at the change from baseline, there's a difference between the placebo and the losmapimod group. So these are changes in the right direction. There's a small number, but they are changes in the right direction. And clinically, looking at reachable workspace, so this is something that really measures, you can see at the bottom, how well the arms move around, and quantifies it, which is pretty cool. And you can see, exactly how these sensors measure how well your shoulder moves. And they do this two ways. Number one, if you're sitting in front of your computers, just you doing this now, and the other way of doing it would be something equivalent to thinking about like holding a can or a gallon of milk. So seeing, because your mobility is different if you're holding a weight as well. And they did, similar to the MRI, they did show a nominal but statistically significant improvement in the total amount that you can move, kind of your mobility of your shoulder. And so this is calling apart here. If you look at this is looking at the non-dominant and the dominant hands, and this is looking at the changes in terms of placebo, and then individuals taking losmapimod. And you can see these changes are small, but they are statistically significant. So again, kind of moving in the right direction. They did not see that reflected when people were not holding a weight. So all told, oh, sorry, got one more slide here. All told, again, looking at this in terms of the open label extension. So this is same idea, but following people out. Here you can see these are the individuals who were on placebo, and they seem to have stabilized in the open label extension. This is a well advanced therapy. It is now in phase 3 clinical trials. And so we'll look for those results in the future. But based on their phase 2 results, they were able to show at least a stabilization, if not some improvement, and very little safety concerns, which I did not present today. So this is, like I said, the most advanced therapy that there is right now. So keep moving. One of the other really exciting ways to thinking about treating to treating FSHD is to simply knock down or silence the DUX4. You don't want it, you don't need it, you're not using it. People who are not affected by FSHD aren't expressing DUX4, and so quite simply, one of the easiest ways of thinking about treating the disease is simply to knock down the DUX4. And there are two companies working in this space. The first is Avidity. They are again, just behind Fulcrum. They're one of the companies that's really quite far advanced in their trial program, in that this is an active and ongoing enrolling study, their phase 1/2 clinical trial. And so this is their drug. So it's an antibody oligonucleotide conjugate, say it 3 times fast, or AOC. And so you have this antibody to the transferrin 1 receptor, and that's done to help get that siRNA into the muscles. It's using your iron metabolism system to help kind of get the drug into the muscles. So is this antibody to the transferrin 1 receptor, and then it's linked to the silencing RNA, and that silencing RNA in this case is against DUX4. So it's directly targeting the DUX4 at the RNA level and trying to silence it. And this is just an example of how it works. So again, it uses that antibody to help get that silencing RNA into the muscle. So as soon as it binds to that transferrin 1 receptor, it's cleaved, and the oligo is free to do its work to degrade the DUX4. And hopefully you don't make DUX4 protein, and therefore you don't have toxic proteins. So that's really the goal of that particular trial. This is the trial design. As I said, it's active and enrolling right now. So one of the two trial programs right now that is either fully that's really in the clinic at this exact moment. One of the three, excuse me. And so this is the study design. So it's a dose escalating phase 1/2 clinical trial. And you can see that, as people move through, they get the infusions, roughly speaking, about once every 12 weeks. And then there's this open label extension or expanded access in the future. So that is that trial program. Behind that is the Arrowhead DUX4 program, which is a phase 1/2A dose escalating study to evaluate the safety, tolerability, and pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of this ARO DUX4. It's a bit of a similar approach in that, again, it's this TRiM platform that's designed to target the DUX4 transcript at the RNA level, and it has this targeting ligand to help it kind of hone in and reach the muscle cell. And this is their trial plan here. So they, again, this is a phase 1/2, so similarly expected to be kind of a small study, but with dose escalation and safety in mind. So single dose here, followed for 90 days, and then there are these multiple ascending dose cohorts where people receive the drug at periodic, either every 3 or 6 months, with biopsies to test the engagement in the muscle, and then clinical outcome measures and patient-reported outcomes to begin to explore the efficacy of it. These are their clinical trial objectives. As I mentioned, it's a phase 1/2, so the first objective is always safety, which is what they're showing here. The secondary objective is to see whether or not it gets into the muscle. And then you can see a variety of different kind of exploratory objectives, in terms of the biomarkers, that muscle fat fraction, the reachable workspace, which I just showed you, and then some of the other clinical and patient-reported outcomes that we think are important. This study, you can see here, they have email contact and clinical trials register. So it's including people from 18 to 70 years old. And you can see that they have to have genetic confirmation of FSHD1, and then a certain criteria in terms of the muscle fat fraction and clinical severity. Okay, last but not least, is what's working downstream, which is the muscle necrosis and degeneration. So at the end of the day, I think we showed that picture of the MRI earlier. You can see as the disease progresses, you get that muscle scarring and loss of muscle. And so even if you treat the disorder at the basis, you still have muscles that are affected. Those treatments won't necessarily help those muscles grow back. Some of that's on you and the ability for those muscles to regenerate. So one thing you can think about is, well, can we just, work on that step as well? Um, and this is the next program targets a protein called myostatin. This has been of interest in FSHD and a number of other muscular dystrophies for a long time. So this is a protein that basically inhibits muscle growth. So it stops muscles from growing too large. If you overexpress this by itself, you can actually cause muscles to get smaller. And if you inactivate it in animals, you can make those muscles bigger. And so in a mouse model of FSHD, if you inhibit the myostatin, you ended up with more muscle mass and strength. So this is the Roche program, and this is their drug. So it's designed to bind to latent myostatin. So basically, it's basically trying to get rid of the myostatin and allow the muscles to get bigger, essentially independent of the mechanism of FSHD. So it binds to latent myostatin. It stops it from being converted into active myostatin. So it decreases myostatin signaling, which increases muscle growth and function. And that's really the goal. It is what they call a sweeping antibody, so it has a high affinity for latent myostatin. It's essentially designed to kind of clear it immediately from the cell, and recycle it out of the body. So they have a maneuver study. So this is the one I misspoke earlier. It's one of 3 active clinical trials right now. This is again, it's phase 1, phase 2, multi-center randomized placebo-controlled double-blind study to evaluate the safety, pharmacodynamics, it's a mouthful, tolerability and efficacy of this in individuals living with FSHD. And so, like all other phase 1, 2 clinical trials, so they're looking at safety, and they're looking to see whether or not they can show some proof of concept, using those muscle MRIs. So you can actually see the muscles get bigger and have reduced fat fraction on MRI. So that's really, those are the 2 primary objectives. And then again, similar to other phase 1, 2 clinical trials, looking at the pharmacodynamics, so how long does the drug stay around in your body, and then to look at the immune response and other pharmacodynamic effects from individuals with FSHD. So here, the way this works, they're looking for up to 48 individuals. The study is actively enrolling right now. So you have this kind of pre-treatment phase, and then you would either receive the drug or placebo with a 1-to-1 chance of getting either one for a total of a year, basically. But then at the end of that year, everybody can move over to that open label extension. And here are their key inclusion criteria. So kind of very similar in that, 18 to 65 years of age, genetic confirmation, kind of moderate severity FSHD, and able to walk unaided, and then trying to keep things consistent over the course of the clinical trial. And we didn't talk about this for many of the other programs, but in a lot of cases, the exclusion criteria are roughly similar, that you can't be pregnant, you can't have other significant medical conditions that would essentially make it less safe for you to be testing a new drug. And then you have to be able to have MRIs. So a lot of these things are very similar to some of the other trials that we talked about. So like I said, they're looking at the MRI, the percentage of contractile volume of the quadricep muscles. Safety, as I said, and then looking at changes in myostatin and the pharmacodynamics in terms of their key secondary endpoints. And they are ongoing and enrolling at 10 different sites, which you can see there. So what can you do now? I mean, gosh, I covered an awful lot of ground in the past 30 minutes. And I hope you can see there are a diversity of clinical trial choices and mechanism of action, both either active and in the clinic right now, or planning to be clinic in the very near future. So what can you do now? Well, the first thing you can do is email Michaela Walker and enroll in one of these natural history studies, which help us better design clinical trials. You can participate in registries. You can do what you're doing today, which is to stay informed on development programs. There's a whole wealth of these. Many of these are moving forward. I think sometimes I get the question, well, which one should I participate in? Well, I don't want to sound flippant, but I mean, you should participate in the trial that you're able to get into and that you're eligible for, because all of the trials I talked about, every single one of them has a plausible benefit for individuals living with FSHD. So I think if there's, I wouldn't spend too much time trying to figure out that this is the exact right trial. I think one of the key steps is to try and enroll these trials as quickly as possible. That gives us the answer about whether or not it's going to be effective or not. And then at the end of the day, this is just the beginning. Trial populations are usually narrower than the general population. That is really frustrating. It's frustrating for me. It's frustrating for you. But it's a necessary step because the primary focus has to be on safety and making sure that it would be safe for you to take something that's essentially never been seen, in a lot of cases, never been seen in humans before. And so, the focus has to be on safety and then expanding out. As these drugs move through trials, the society needs to start working with insurers on payment models to make sure that everybody has access to these therapies if they're able to be approved in the United States, Europe, or other countries. And then, you can see as you kind of move through where you're thinking, well, this one's targeting this step, this one's targeting on that step. It's completely plausible that we may be thinking about different combinations of therapies in the future. And I think so we have a lot of work left to do. But there's so much promise, and you can really see kind of building on that foundation through 2023. And then I expect to see really an explosion in these trials in 2024 and beyond. So with that, this is the Center for Inherited Muscle Research. We really thank you for listening. Hopefully I didn't go too fast. Like I said, there was a lot of different studies to get through. Next year, if there continue to be this many studies, we'll have to expand the time for this webinar or split it up. But that's a good problem.
Great. So thank you so much. Do you want to unshare your slides so we can be there? Great. That was a terrific overview. I'm really impressed that you covered so much in the time that you had. So we have a lot of questions coming in, and one I wanted to mention when you talk about what can you do to be ready or to get into a trial is that a lot of folks with FSHD have not had a formal doctor's diagnosis. It's not on their medical record. And I think it needs to be, you need to have that clinical diagnosis to be included in a trial. So if you're one of those people who've just never gone to the neurologist to get that formal diagnosis, that would be an important step because you know how long it takes to even get an appointment. And by the time you get it, maybe the door for that particular trial might have closed. So I think that's a really important part of being ready, trial ready. And there was a question about whether you would need to have a genetic test. And again, that is an inclusion criteria for, I think, all of the trials going on now. So again, getting that genetic test can take a number of months, going in to see the doctor who can then order the test. They probably want you to see a genetic counselor, and then the test itself can take several months to, complete and get back to you. So
Yeah, I would say, I think I had that map of the FSHD CTRN sites. I think if you've been sitting around and saying, well, what can that doctor do for me? Well, I hope the presentation encouraged you that getting in to see one of, an experienced neuromuscular specialist is an important first step to establishing the diagnosis and then to learning whether or not you might be eligible for these different trials. And then the second piece is that they all require genetic testing, as you mentioned, June, but some of the trials will actually pay for genetic testing. So that's kind of on a study by study basis. And so you would want to again speak with your neurologist, look at the trial that you might be eligible for, and then either you can do it through the trial or through your insurance company. That's correct.
So we had a couple of questions relating to safety of some of these experimental therapeutics. So one person mentioned in particular, they heard there might be immune and reproductive system concerns for children, I guess, with losmapimod, which is Fulcrum's drug. And the other question had to do with Epic Bio and safety concerns around sort of viral vectors, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in general, participating in a clinical trial is a deeply personal decision. The trials that are in the phase 1, 2 phase, which is essentially all of them at this point, except for the losmapimod study, these are the first time these drugs are being tested in humans. And so, even though the companies and the investigators have done, and the FDA and the EMA have done an awful lot of work to try to provide for people's safety, but there is an inherent risk in terms of participating in a clinical trial that has to be acknowledged. The benefit, of course, is that if the drug's effective, then you're one of the very first people to receive it in the world. So that's kind of the risk. You have to assess your own risk benefit, kind of how much risk are you willing to take? Most phase 1, 2 clinical trials have a focus on adults for that reason. And then some of the trials, a lot of times in the drug development, people don't really understand risk in terms of either children or pregnancy until very late, just because that's the way most development programs work. So as the drug kind of gets to closer to approval, that's when people start to get a handle on those questions. And so that's, you just have to kind of wait for that to go through all at once. And then regarding the Epic Bio specifically, so that AAV-rh74, it is a virus. It does have some side effects related to that virus. It has been tested and used in other gene therapy programs. So, even though it has some risks associated to it, um, it's also known to be fairly safe. I think one of the questions for that specifically is that, does it modulate the DNA itself? So it would modulate the DNA. So as the muscle cells divide, the changes that it made to kind of silence the DUX4 would be carried through in the body. So it should be sustained. It's potentially sustained, but it would not go into the germline. So it wouldn't necessarily prevent you from passing down the FSHD if you had kids in it. And I think, yeah, that's what I'd say about it.
Okay, great. We have a number of other questions, well, for all of the different drugs, but let's stick with the Epic Bio one for now. There's a bunch of questions there. So there is a concern about whether the viral vector could interact or in some way create a conflict with the use of vaccines. I guess, for example, would you become more immunoresponsive or reactive to it because your immune system has already been primed by some vaccines that are out there?
Yeah,
So that's
so so there are in spinal muscular atrophy and Duchenne and other places where people have either FDA approved gene therapies that use viruses like this, um, or FDA approved virus, or are in clinical trials. The kind of the immune reaction to the virus is really in the first 30 to 60 days. So it's during that time period that, I think most people would say stay away from live vaccines, because your immune system is being shifted around. But once that kind of time period's passed, there's not been evidence of ongoing immune system changes over a long period of time. So I think outside of, like I said, it's really thinking about like the acute therapy, um, as being a kind of specific period of time. And then after that, there's not evidence that the immune system is permanently altered.
Okay. There's a question, do you know how the participants in an Epic Bio trial might be selected?
I do not know that, but I think um, I would say that it's a very small study, and so I think things that you can do, like I said early on, is to come to an FSHD CTRN site, make your interest in trials known to the physician at that site, and then a lot of work goes into selecting the people who are going to be have the least safety concerns going to the study, and best poised to answer some of those early questions.
Okay. There's a question, some of these studies require an MRI. What are the reasons someone would be excluded from being able to have an MRI?
So it's all the same reasons. If you so certain pacemakers, you can't have a MRI. It's a magnet. So if you have metal in your body, you can't have an MRI. That's the main reason. And then and some people really can't tolerate MRIs. It's a pretty claustrophobic. So that's really, it is an important thing as part of the study. So you'd have to be able to have the MRIs to be in the study.
Okay. Um, there's some questions about possible access of these drugs. Well, let's say they do get approved. Current trials, for example, exclude people in wheelchairs. They exclude younger people, children and older people. What's likely to happen once one of these drugs is approved? Will these groups of individuals that are excluded from trials not be able to have access to the treatments?
Well, that's the work that falls to you all at the FSHD Society and us as clinicians, right? I mean, I think it's important to remember that the approval of a drug it really is the beginning of a journey. And so in similar conditions, oftentimes the approval is closely to closely linked to kind of that early trial population. But both the company, the society, the clinicians will continue to do studies to begin to against expand the scope of the drug. So for pediatric populations, those do require an extra set of studies very often, that are either done at the time of approval or shortly thereafter. For individuals who are more severely affected, like in wheelchairs, a lot of times that's your doctor on the phone with an insurance company. It's my very favorite thing to do, and trying to argue the case for that. And then the amount of data that we can bring forward, both as a society, in terms of the benefit to patients. It is work that will continue to happen even after the drug is approved. So I don't want people on the phone to think, oh, the drug's approved, I'm going to be able to get it right away. A lot of times, that's the work, like I said, that we're doing, and I know the society is doing through Project Mercury to really ensure that on day one, as many people have access to it as possible. But that it often takes some time.
Okay. There are a number of questions asking about, I guess, regeneration. So if you experience significant degeneration of muscles, what is the capacity for recovering from that, and what therapies are maybe directed towards that, after the damage has been done by DUX4?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll say a couple things about that. So if you remember that MRI slide that was in Fulcrum section, you can see at some point your muscles do get replaced by fat and scar tissue completely, and at that point, that muscle is probably not recoverable. But before that point occurs in that muscle, your muscles through satellite cells have a lot of capacity for regeneration on their own in the absence of DUX4 signaling. And so things that you can encourage your muscles to do in terms of developing to regenerate, regular exercise, staying healthy, eating a well-rounded meal. Those are things that you can do today. And then the Roche program with that myostatin inhibitor is something that would also work specifically on kind of building and developing those muscles. So it's probably a combination of things, and that's why I think I'm excited about that program in addition to some of these more targeted approaches.
Okay. Um, oh, here's a interesting question. It says when you get older, you lose muscle mass at a rate of about 1 or 2% per year, which is kind of in the same range as what you're seeing for FSHD. So I guess the question is, how do you how do you tell them apart?
Well, it's a lot of the work that the FSHD CTRN has done has really been to define the clinical course specific to FSHD. So a lot of the data that's going to the FDA or EMA around that is based on work that's been done in individuals with FSHD. It is true that at some point you just start to lose muscle mass. Um, in FSHD and in normal aging. And so, it comes back to that same thing, eating a balanced meal, and then most importantly is to continue to exercise and stay active as safely as possible.
Right, thank you. Some questions about the MOVE study. They heard that there are remote assessments. Does this mean you don't have to go to the site, or
I
can it
think
be? Yeah.
there are remote pilots, but I think in almost all cases, study participation begins at the site. So that would be a great question for Michaela Walker
Okay.
and to ask her.
Okay, great. By the way, if someone, maybe Beth, there's a question asking about Michaela Walker's contact email. So if you could put that in, that would be great. Um, Here's one. It's a woman who has no kids yet. Would you recommend freezing eggs before going into a clinical trial?
Um, I mean, I think that's a difficult question to answer. I'm not sure I'll provide all the answer. I would simply say that again, especially for the phase 1, 2 clinical trials, there are inherent risks, and so if you wanted to be particularly safe, that would be something you could consider.
Right. Um, so, there's a question. What are the obstacles right now for clinical trials? Is it lack of funding for research? Are drug companies reluctant to invest because they don't think a rare disease is profitable? Well, clearly there are companies that are investing. So
Yeah, I
what's your
mean,
perspective on that?
I'm stoked. I'm excited. I mean, there's been more new clinical trial development programs in FSHD than I've certainly ever seen. I think it's on all of us. I mean, what's the obstacle now? I think the obstacles are twofold. As I mentioned earlier, FSHD has some inherent challenges in terms of trial design that are trying to be overcome by the work of the CTRN through that Resolve study and now through MOVE. So one thing you can do is to help, is to enroll in those studies, which helps us overcome those, barriers in terms of trial design. And then it is fair to say that there's a lot of company interest. There's a lot of new drugs that are being tested. One kind of second challenge is that if we don't enroll these studies, if companies aren't able to come in at FSHD and enroll their clinical trial to meet their objectives, then that does turn future companies off. So I think the number one take-home message is, if you're able to participate in a study, please do consider that. So I think that's really the thing that you can do.
I'll just underscore that. I think this community, all of you out there listening, has been just tremendously responsive. I mean, you're paying attention, you're reading the stuff that we inundate you with, and are really very well informed and well connected. And that has really made a difference. I mean, the first few trials got enrolled in kind of record time. The companies were kind of astounded, I think, which encouraged other companies to double up their, investment in FSHD. So it's important to keep that momentum going.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a question: are there any trials coming to New Zealand, Australia? Are you allowed to say?
I believe that there are, is the short answer.
Yeah.
Yes.
So stay tuned. Are there trials that are open to patients that are very mildly affected? So
Yeah, I think so I think if you kind of in the middle you talk about those phases of study. So a lot of times those phase 1, 2 trials are looking for that kind of Goldilocks group. So these are people who are somewhat affected but not too affected. And as I mentioned, it can be really frustrating. I think we just need to have some patience because oftentimes then as you move past that phase 1, 2, you get into the phase 3, those trials are often they're bigger. And so they start to look for a wider group of people. So that's really kind of the opportunity if you're kind of sitting outside of that moderate range, is to wait for these trials to go through. And like I said, the good news, as June pointed out, is that these trials are enrolling quickly, and so that just makes it easier for us to get past that over that hump and into that phase 3 space.
somewhere that was an interesting question. I'm not seeing it, but I was interested. If you've been in the Acceleron trial, so the ACE83, I think, or the other myostatin, the previous myostatin inhibitor trial, would that disqualify you from being in the Roche trial, the new myostatin inhibitor?
I don't believe it would just because of assuming you met the other eligibility criteria, just because it's
Yeah.
been long enough.
Okay. There wouldn't be like your body wouldn't have antibodies to anti-myostatin and kind of
And
one of them.
they're different molecules, so you wouldn't expect a lot of cross reactivity.
Okay. Um, let's see. Some of these are about insurance and so on. Someone is wondering, can you envision a therapy that reduces DUX4 combined with some kind of regenerative, like maybe stem cell-based therapy to help muscles regenerate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's or even frankly even the Roche compound with the myostatin inhibitor, if that was successful, you could definitely you could definitely imagine these different combinations of we showed 4 different steps where you could target the disease. In theory, having an approved therapy at each one of those 4 steps is only going to be helpful. So yes, I think stem cells or the myostatin inhibitors in combination with these DUX4 knockdown strategies is very tenable. Now, our challenge will be convincing insurance companies here in the United States to pay for multiple therapies.
Mhm.
So.
Right. Um, there are the it's a little repeating, but I think people are very concerned about whether children will have access to therapies at the same time they become available for adults. I mean, what does the regulatory agency require for that?
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
think speaking most specifically to the FDA here in the United States, if because of safety concerns, if a drug can be tested in adults first before children, it should be and will be, which is why you see the trials designed the way that they are. In a lot of cases, though, the FDA will allow for a pediatric plan, so a plan to move that age range down in terms of who's eligible for treatment. That has to be initiated by the company who's developing that drug. And then they have to do several other kind of animal studies to show, just it's safe for the developing body, basically. And so I think I would expect that, right around when drugs are being approved, that's usually when companies are kind of thinking about how do we get to a place where we can treat children with it. So, um, I think you're in some ways you're balancing competing priorities because you want to get that drug approved so it can reach as many people as quickly as possible. On the other hand, you need to do those additional studies to reach pediatric patients.
Okay. Um, This goes into some science. FSHD is epigenetic. Any ideas of what kind of environmental or genetic stimulus might trigger DUX4 gene expression?
And to my knowledge, people have been unsuccessful at identifying that. It's a great question. I know folks in the CTRN have been thinking about that type of thing, but to my knowledge, no data yet.
Yeah. There are studies going on for families where everybody, who's effective, they have the same, repeat contractions, so on, but they have different ages of onset, different severity levels. And there's a lot of interest in studying those families because maybe there's a genetic component that one person has that's protecting them and not protecting the more affected member and so on. So if you are in a family like this and would like to know more about that kind of research, contact me, put you in touch with those groups. So let's see. Oh, we get asked this question a lot. If you live a little far from one of the CTRN sites, can you still participate, I guess? So, and that might extend to like going across national borders. I mean, what are the restrictions on who can?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is to email the central coordinating site and that's at Michaela Walker because they do have some travel funds available, and so it may be dealt with on a situation basis. And then I also know they're always adding sites, and so if you're able to say, hey, we live in this country, we have a doctor that's willing to participate, and we've got enough people here. I think that's the kind of thing that helps bring studies to you too. So.
Yeah. For someone who is very severely affected, is it possible to over-exercise and damage your muscles?
To date, the studies on exercise have generally shown benefit. I think most of the studies rely on people doing moderate to moderate exercise. What's moderate exercise for me and somebody who's fully wheelchair dependent are two different things. And so you don't want to overtax your muscles, but you want to kind of stay in that moderate intensity zone.
Okay. And let's see. I think there was a question here, maybe reiterating, maybe it's a good way to maybe wrap up today's session is what does it mean to be trial ready from the perspective of a patient? What should you check off? What's your checklist of if you've done these things, you are trial ready?
Yeah, I think I mean, there's a couple different ways of thinking about that. There's trial ready as a community. That means that we know where people living with FSHD are. We know how to design a clinical trial that we can give it an up or down vote. So that's the worst thing is to have a study and you're like, maybe the drug works, maybe it doesn't. And so a lot of the work in the community is to say, look, if you meet these steps, these measures, we think this drug will be effective for people living with FSHD. What can you do to be trial ready? You can be in contact with one of those CTRN sites and with the society as well. And then you can have your genetic testing set and ready to go. And just working with your site to see which studies am I eligible for. One of the challenges with these early studies is that there are way more people that could participate in them than are able to just because of the trial sizes. And so, I think being an advocate for yourself at a site where they are doing that study can be very helpful for you.
Okay, well, thank you. We ran a little bit over, but we appreciate you so much for taking the time today and giving us so much information and answering so many questions. Thank you also to our audience. And I want to bring back Beth who'll give some concluding remarks.
Yes, there was lots of comments to you, Dr. Johnson, that they miss you at the University of Utah. So you've got a fan base in Utah as well.
That's kind.
I just, again, want to thank everyone for attending our webinar today. Very special thanks to Dr. Nick Johnson. Exciting updates, information, answering all of our questions. It's really is exciting times, as a lot of people have commented in our chat today. Our next FSHD University webinar is in the new year. on January 18th, where doctors Nicole Wormans and Nathaniel Racing from Radboud University in the Netherlands are going to speak about a broader view to treating FSHD and what we can do to be as healthy and trial fit as possible, which is exactly something that Dr. Johnson spoke about, the importance of today. That's it. We wish everyone peace and joy this holiday season and a new year filled with hope and progress. So we will see you next year. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.